The ballroom shimmered beneath 1,000 chandeliers, each crystal fragment scattering gold across the marble floors. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed, and the hum of polite conversation filled the air. That particular kind of laughter that only the wealthy seemed to master, light and hollow at once. Adam Monroe stood near the grand piano at the center of the room, surrounded by reporters, investors, and socialites dressed in silver and silk. His navy suit was sharp enough to cut glass, his posture perfectly poised, the picture of composure. Yet behind those steel-gray eyes was a fatigue that success could never cure. "Mr. Monroe," a journalist asked, smiling too brightly, "you've built empires from code. Is there anything left that challenges you anymore?" Adam tilted his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "A challenge?" he echoed, his tone wry. "Maybe the only real challenge left is finding something, or someone, that still feels real." Laughter rippled around him. The crowd leaned closer, waiting for the billionaire's next line. He set down his drink, glanced at the glossy black piano nearby, and said lightly, "Tell you what, I'll marry anyone who can play Chopin's Ballet No. 1 flawlessly." The laughter this time was louder, indulgent, mocking, the kind that turns a statement into spectacle. Someone clapped. Someone else shouted, "You better start planning the wedding then." Adam smiled thinly but said nothing more. For him, it was a joke. Or maybe a way to deflect from the emptiness clawing quietly beneath his charm. And then the room shifted. A small metallic clink. The sound of a tray being set down. A murmur. From the edge of the ballroom, a young woman in a black uniform stepped forward. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, and her expression was calm in a way that didn't fit the noise around her. She walked past tables and chandeliers and stunned faces, straight toward the piano. Adam's amusement faltered. "Miss, this area is—" someone began. But she didn't stop. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys as if greeting an old friend. No one spoke. The hum of conversation died, leaving only the faint creak of the piano stool. Then came the first note. It cut through the air. Soft, pure, devastating. The Ballet No. 1 of Chopin unfolded not as performance, but confession. Each phrase rose and fell like the tide of something buried deep. Grief, longing, the ache of something once lost. The melody swelled, and with it, the grand hall transformed. Waiters froze mid-step. The clinking of glasses ceased. The chandeliers seemed to shimmer slower, as though time itself had paused to listen. Adam couldn't look away. He had heard the piece dozens of times from world-class pianists in concert halls. None of them had ever sounded like this. Her playing wasn't perfect, not in the technical sense. There were hesitations, breaths between notes, moments where her fingers trembled ever so slightly. But in those flaws lived something more honest than perfection. Pain. She played like someone remembering how to feel. As the coda approached, her eyes glistened, unfocused, not on the crowd, not on the piano, but somewhere far away. Somewhere she could still hear a laugh that no longer existed. When the final note fell, it didn't echo. It simply landed, quietly, tenderly, and vanished into silence. The ballroom remained frozen. No one clapped. No one breathed. Then slowly she stood, smoothed her apron, and bowed. It wasn't a showman's bow. It was an apology, to the music, to herself, to someone unseen. And before the first sound of applause broke through, she turned and walked away. Adam's chest felt tight. For a heartbeat, the noise of the world had fallen away, and something in him, something long dormant, had stirred awake. He rose slightly, eyes following her as she disappeared past the velvet curtains. "Who is she?" he murmured under his breath. No one answered. The MC tried to laugh it off, cracking a joke about unexpected talent, but the crowd's applause was uncertain, scattered, their laughter dulled by something they didn't understand. Adam stood there, still staring at the piano. The keys were smudged where her fingers had touched them, as though she'd left behind a part of herself. He set his untouched champagne aside and walked to the piano, brushing his hand across the smooth surface. It was warm, still holding the echo of her music. For the rest of the evening, the laughter returned, the deals resumed, and the world spun back into its usual rhythm. But Adam didn't hear any of it. All he could think of was the look in her eyes as she played, that strange mixture of surrender and strength, as if every note cost her a memory. When he left the gala later that night, he glanced once more at the piano. The hall was empty, but in his mind the music still lingered, haunting, unfinished. "She didn't play like she wanted applause," he whispered. "She played like she wanted to survive." Outside, the rain had started again, steady and quiet. As he stepped into the night, Adam realized he hadn't felt the rain in years. Brooklyn was quieter at night, not silent, but human. The sounds of the city outside Jasmine's small apartment window were soft and steady. A distant train, footsteps on wet pavement, the sigh of wind brushing past rusted fire escapes. She pushed open the door, the faint chime above it jingling weakly and flicked on the single lamp by the sofa. Its light cast a golden circle that barely reached the edges of the tiny space. Tofu. Her white cat lifted his head from the couch and let out a sleepy mew. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, slipping off her shoes. "It's just us again." The tray from the gala still sat by the door. She hadn't even returned it to the catering company yet. Her uniform smelled faintly of champagne and roses. Jasmine folded it carefully, tucking it into the laundry basket, as though sealing away the night she wished hadn't happened. On the bookshelf sat a single framed photo. Two girls, one tall, one much smaller, smiling on a summer afternoon. The younger one, Ava, had freckles across her nose and a mischievous grin that seemed too big for her face. Jasmine's chest tightened. She reached out and straightened the frame, her fingers brushing dust from the glass. "You'd have laughed at me tonight," she whispered. "I broke every rule I made for myself." She moved to the small, upright piano against the wall. It was old and slightly out of tune. She hadn't lifted its lid in years. Stacked on top were books, unopened mail, and a half-burned candle. She sat on the edge of the bench and stared at the keys, the once familiar pattern of ivory and ebony that now looked foreign, even hostile. Her reflection in the glossy surface was tired, almost unrecognizable. The girl who once stood on stages wearing silk dresses and radiant confidence had long since vanished. She closed her eyes and the memory returned, vivid, merciless. The night of her concert, the phone call backstage, the voice trembling on the other end of the line. "There's been an accident." For one terrible moment, the world had gone still. Then someone had touched her shoulder and whispered, "The show must go on." And Jasmine had played. She had played while her world ended miles away. When the final applause roared through the theater, she had felt nothing, only the hollow ache of realizing that no sound, no skill, no perfection could bring Ava back. That night, she swore she would never touch the piano again. Now, years later, the guilt still clung to her like dust. Jasmine stood, unable to bear the sight of the instrument, and crossed to the kitchenette. The kettle whistled as she filled a chipped mug with tea. The aroma of chamomile filled the air, calming but empty. Tofu jumped onto the counter, curling beside her. She ran a hand over his fur. "You're the only one who listens, huh?" The cat purred in reply, and for a moment the sound was enough. On the windowsill, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Somewhere across the river, Manhattan still glowed, all glass and ambition, a world that had once been hers. Now it felt galaxies away. Jasmine carried her tea to the couch, sinking into the cushions. Her fingers trembled slightly, the aftershock of performing in front of hundreds of people again. She hadn't planned to play that night. She didn't even know what made her do it. Maybe it was defiance. Or maybe it was something deeper, a part of her that had never truly died, no matter how much she tried to bury it. The melody still haunted her ears. Not Chopin's, but her own version of it, marked with hesitation and grief. She remembered the look on the man's face. Adam Monroe, the billionaire. The joke that started everything, the way he had stared at her, not with amusement, but with recognition. She shook her head, scolding herself. Don't be ridiculous. He's just another rich man who wanted to be entertained. But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the image of his eyes, sharp, cold, and suddenly human. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the river. The rain began again, tapping gently on the glass. Jasmine leaned back, tea cooling in her hands, and closed her eyes. She saw Ava's face, heard her laugh, and for the first time in years, the sound of piano keys echoed faintly in her dreams. Soft, hesitant, like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. Morning light crept through the blinds of the small apartment, casting soft stripes across the floor. The air smelled faintly of rain, the kind that made the world seem newly washed, even if nothing inside had really changed. Jasmine pulled her hair into a loose bun and buttoned up her uniform. The name tag, slightly worn at the edges, still read Vivace Cafe. She fed Tofu, who meowed impatiently and whispered, "Guard the place for me, maestro." Before stepping out into the cool morning, Brooklyn was just waking up. Storefronts were still half closed, street vendors setting up carts, the city stretching and yawning after the storm. Jasmine liked this hour, quiet enough to think, busy enough to feel invisible. Vivace Cafe sat on a corner near the park, an old brick building with ivy creeping up its sides and music always playing softly in the background. The sign above the door had faded gold letters that read, "Vivace, for those who still dream." Inside, the aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon filled the air. Leonard, the owner, was already there, wearing his usual suspenders and a smile that reached his eyes. He was in his late 60s, gruff but kind, and treated his cafe like a church, where silence, stories, and second chances all belonged. "Morning, sunshine," he greeted as she tied her apron. "You look like you didn't sleep." "Didn't," she admitted, forcing a smile. "Long night?" "Mm-hmm." Leonard raised a brow, wiping the counter. "Heard about some billionaire gala downtown. Half the city's been talking about it." Jasmine froze for a fraction of a second. "Really?" he nodded. "Yeah, some girl apparently stole the show. Played Chopin like she was possessed." He chuckled. "Can you imagine the guts? Poor rich folks probably didn't know whether to clap or cry." Jasmine's heart skipped. She busied herself with the espresso machine. "Sounds dramatic," Leonard didn't press. He had known her long enough to recognize the walls she built, and he respected them. The first few hours passed in quiet rhythm. The hiss of steam, the clatter of cups, the low hum of morning chatter. Jasmine found comfort in repetition. It made the world predictable. At around 10, the door chimed softly. She looked up. A man stepped in, tall, dressed in a charcoal coat still damp at the shoulders, his hair tousled as if the wind hadn't been kind. He looked around slowly, as though unfamiliar with the idea of small spaces. When his gaze landed on her, the world seemed to narrow. Jasmine's fingers froze on the coffee grinder. She recognized him instantly, though every instinct screamed to pretend otherwise. Adam Monroe, he looked different without the spotlight. Quieter, almost out of place. His sharp features were softened by fatigue. There were faint shadows under his eyes, the kind that came from sleepless nights, not stress alone. "Good morning," Leonard greeted, breaking the silence. "What can I get you?" Adam's eyes flicked briefly toward him before returning to Jasmine.
"Just a coffee," he said.
"Black." His voice was calm, but it carried that same resonance she'd heard in the ballroom. Confident, detached, as though he was used to being listened to. Jasmine turned to make his drink,
Focusing on every motion, the grind, the pour.
the swirl of steam, anything to avoid his gaze. She set the cup down gently in front of him.
"Here you go. Thank you."
"Miss Jasmine," Leonard supplied with a grin. "She keeps this place running."
"I just pretend to be in charge," Adam smiled faintly.
"Jasmine," he repeated, like testing the sound. "Beautiful name," she forced a polite nod. "Enjoy your coffee." He took a seat near the window, the one closest to the old upright piano Leonard refused to sell. Jasmine glanced at it briefly, her stomach tightening. She hadn't touched it since she started working there. Time stretched. He didn't take out a phone or laptop like most customers did. He just sat, eyes wandering between the rain-streaked glass and the piano beside him. Jasmine tried to ignore it, but she could feel his presence. Not intrusive, just steady, like a weight in the room that changed its balance. When the rush hour passed, Leonard leaned toward her and whispered, "He's been sitting there for nearly an hour. Think he's waiting for someone?" She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just listening," Leonard said thoughtfully, glancing at the piano.
"Some people don't come to be heard, kiddo."
"They come to listen." His words lingered with her long after he went to the back to check supplies. At one point, Adam stood and approached the counter for a refill. Up close, Jasmine noticed the faint scent of cedar and rain on him, understated, expensive yet strangely human. "You're a long way from marble halls and flashbulbs," she said quietly before she could stop herself. He looked at her,
Eyes narrowing slightly.
"You recognize me," she gave a small shrug.
"You were hard to miss." A beat passed, and then he smiled, but it wasn't smug.
It was almost self-conscious. "I didn't expect you to be here." "I work here," she replied. "Not many places left that don't require small talk." He studied her face, as if searching for the woman from the piano and not the one in the apron. "That night, you played like the world was ending." "It did?" she said softly. Then, realizing how it sounded, she turned away.
"Refills on the house." He didn't push.
Just accepted the cup and returned to his seat. The rain began again, gentle and persistent. Outside, people hurried by with umbrellas, but inside the cafe, the world slowed. Jasmine glanced at him once more. He sat back, eyes half closed, listening not to music, but to the small symphony of ordinary sounds. Cups clinking, rain tapping, the low hum of life. Something about it unsettled her. Not in fear, but in recognition. When he finally left, he placed a generous tip under the saucer, along with a folded napkin. After he was gone, Jasmine hesitated before picking it up. On it, in neat handwriting, were 5 words: "You play like you breathe." Her breath caught. She folded the napkin and slipped it into her pocket, her heart drumming quietly against the fabric. For the rest of the day, she told herself it meant nothing. He was just being kind or curious. Billionaires didn't come back twice. But when the bell over the door chimed the next morning, and she saw him again, same table, same quiet gaze, she realized she might have been wrong. The next morning came with a sky the color of pewter, muted, heavy, undecided between sun and rain. Jasmine was wiping the counter when the bell over the door rang, and there he was again. Adam Monroe, same coat, same unhurried steps, same quiet gaze that seemed to absorb the room. He didn't need to order this time. She was already reaching for the mug.
"Black coffee," she said before he spoke.
He gave a faint nod, the corner of his mouth curving just slightly. "You remember?" "I try to," she replied, setting the cup down gently. And just like that, the ritual began. Every morning, he came, always around 10, never early, never late. He sat at the same table by the window, near the old piano that hadn't been played in years. He brought no phone, no papers, no laptop, only himself and that unreadable expression. Sometimes he'd watch the rain slide down the glass. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and listen to the hiss of the espresso machine, to the murmur of voices, to the faint hum of jazz that Leonard kept playing through the speakers. Jasmine tried not to notice, but she did. Every day, he never demanded her attention, never made conversation unless she spoke first. But the air seemed to shift when he was there. Quieter, steadier, almost sacred. One morning, she finally asked, "Don't you have offices to run? Empires to manage?" He looked up, a hint of amusement glinting behind his calm. Empires can run themselves for an hour. Leonard, overhearing, chuckled from behind the counter. "That's a man who's either too rich or too tired." "Maybe both," Adam said, and took a slow sip of his coffee. Jasmine didn't laugh, but something in her chest eased. The first flicker of warmth since that night at the Gala. As days slipped into weeks, his presence became part of the cafe's rhythm, as natural as the morning light or the hum of the grinder. Regular customers began to whisper, "That's Adam Monroe, isn't it? What's he doing here every day?" But curiosity faded when they realized he never caused a scene. He was polite, quiet, unassuming, almost invisible in the way only powerful men who crave silence can be. Sometimes, when the cafe was slow, Jasmine would steal glances at him. His face was always calm. Yet there was something underneath, a kind of weariness that no amount of money could disguise. Once, she caught him tracing the rim of his coffee cup absent-mindedly, like a pianist searching for notes in an invisible melody. The motion made her breath hitch, an echo of something she thought she'd buried. Leonard noticed, of course. He noticed everything. One afternoon, as Jasmine restocked the pastry case, he leaned in and said quietly, "You know, I think he's not here for the coffee." She frowned. What else would he be here for? Leonard smirked. "Peace, maybe for the first time in his life." She rolled her eyes.
"That's poetic," he shrugged.
"This place collects people who need quiet. Some come to talk, others come to listen." Jasmine thought about that long after Leonard walked away. That evening, the rain returned. It came softly at first, then heavier, drumming on the windows, filling the cafe with its rhythm.
Adam was still there, his coat draped over the chair, a book open but unread in front of him. When he finally stood to leave, she noticed his shoulders were damp again.
Without thinking, she grabbed a towel from behind the counter and handed it to him. "You'll ruin the chairs," she said. He looked at her. Not the towel, not the rain, just her. A faint smile touched his lips. "You care about the chairs?"
"I care about cleaning up after you," she said, and instantly regretted how sharp it sounded. But he only laughed, low, genuine.
Fair enough. As he took the towel, his fingers brushed hers, brief, accidental. Yet it sent a small tremor through her chest. For a moment, they simply stood there, the storm outside framing the silence between them. Then he said softly, "You play like you're remembering how to breathe." Her breath caught. The words, the same ones from the napkin, echoed between them. She didn't reply. Couldn't. He held her gaze for a heartbeat longer, then turned to go. The door closed behind him, leaving a faint bell chime and the smell of rain. Jasmine stood there, towel still in hand, staring at the door long after he was gone. Later that night, When the cafe was empty, she lingered by the piano. Her reflection rippled faintly in its black surface. She hadn't touched it in years, but now something inside her stirred. She reached out, letting her fingers hover over the keys. Not pressing, not yet. Just listening to the silence, her heartbeat in slow rhythm. Rain whispered against the windows, and though she didn't play a single note, she could almost hear it. The ghost of music waiting patiently beneath her fingertips. Maybe, she thought, breathing deeply, this is how healing begins. The rain came hard that morning, a relentless downpour that blurred the city into streaks of grey and silver. Traffic splashed along the streets, umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers, and the world seemed to move faster just to escape getting wet. Vivace Café was nearly empty, its windows fogged with condensation, the faint sound of jazz barely audible beneath the rain. Jasmine moved quietly behind the counter, refilling sugar jars and wiping tables that no one had used. She didn't expect him to come. But then, just as she was adjusting the blinds, the door opened with a gust of cold air and water. Adam Monroe stepped inside, drenched, his coat dripping onto the floor.
Hair darkened by the storm. "Morning," he said, voice low.
As if the weather had taken some of it from him. Jasmine blinked, startled. "You're soaked?" "Apparently billionaires can't control the weather," he replied dryly. She sighed, grabbing a towel and walking around the counter to hand it to him. "Here, you'll ruin the chairs." He smiled, accepting the towel with a quiet, grateful nod.
"You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." For a brief moment,
the distance between them disappeared. Just two people caught in the middle of a storm, bound by small talk and the smell of coffee. Jasmine gestured to the fireplace in the corner. "Sit by the heater before you catch a cold." He did as she said, settling into the seat nearest the flickering flames. Steam began to rise from his coat, filling the air with the faint scent of rain and cedar. Jasmine brought him his usual coffee, placing it carefully on the table beside him. "You know, there's delivery for a reason," she teased. He looked up, one eyebrow slightly raised. "And missed the privilege of being lectured about furniture?" She laughed under her breath, soft, involuntary.
It startled her.
She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd laughed like that. Minutes passed. The storm outside softened but didn't stop. The cafe remained a cocoon of warmth and quiet. Adam sat, hands wrapped around the cup, eyes following the trail of raindrops sliding down the window. Jasmine noticed the way he breathed. Slow, deliberate, like someone who had forgotten how until recently. Finally, he said almost to himself, "You play like you're remembering how to breathe." The words hung between them. Tender and piercing, Jasmine froze, her pulse quickening. "You already wrote that once," she murmured. "I meant it," he said simply. Her throat tightened. "You don't even know me," he looked at her then. Really looked. "You're right, but I know what it's like to stop breathing without dying." Something in his tone made her chest ache. The way he said it, matter of fact, without self-pity. It sounded like a truth too heavy to share, but too real to hide. "You're good with words," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "No, I'm good at avoiding them." "Seems like you're doing fine today." "That's because you're easy to talk to." The simplicity of it disarmed her. She turned away, pretending to rearrange the sugar jars. "You must say that to everyone who serves your coffee." "Actually, no," he replied, his tone sincere. "Most people talk to me because they want something. You're the first who doesn't." She wasn't sure whether to be flattered or offended. "Maybe I just don't have anything to gain." "Or maybe," he said softly, "you have nothing left to lose." Her breath caught again. There was no accusation in his voice, only quiet understanding. For a long while, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, tapping gently against the glass like fingertips on piano keys. Leonard eventually appeared from the back room, breaking the spell.
"Ah, our resident philosopher," he said cheerfully to Adam. "You're scaring away my customers with that brooding face." Adam smiled faintly. "I didn't know there were any to scare." "Touché," Leonard said with a grin, wiping his hands.
Well, if you're going to haunt my cafe, at least try the croissants. They're almost as good as our barista's sarcasm. Jasmine rolled her eyes.
"Thanks, Leonard." Adam chuckled, taking the offered plate.
I'll consider it a professional recommendation. Leonard winked at Jasmine as he walked away. Told you, kiddo, some people don't come here to talk. They come to listen. Her eyes flicked to Adam, who was watching her again. Not with intensity, but with quiet attention, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her stillness. When the rush of noon came, he stood to leave. His coat was dry now, his hair still slightly damp. Jasmine handed him a fresh napkin, an unspoken continuation of their strange, wordless correspondence. But this time, he didn't write anything. He simply said, "Thank you." For the silence, she frowned lightly. "Silence?" he nodded. "The world's too loud."
"I like that you don't fill it." And with that,
he was gone. The bell above the door chimed softly as the rain began to slow. That night, when the cafe emptied and Leonard had gone home, Jasmine lingered again by the piano. The air smelled of espresso and rain. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy lid. She sat down, hands trembling slightly, and lifted the cover. The keys stared back at her, patient, expectant. She placed her fingers gently on the ivory. One note. Just one. It was quiet, almost imperceptible. But it broke something open inside her. Tears pricked her eyes before she could stop them. She closed the lid quickly, pressing her palms against the cool surface. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. "Not yet." But deep down she knew something had shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the sound. The days blurred gently into one another, stitched together by the same small rituals. The hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of roasted beans, the quiet hum of rain that seemed to follow them everywhere. Adam still came every morning. Same table, same black coffee, same silence. But now the silence felt different, softer somehow, as if it belonged to both of them. Sometimes, when he left, Jasmine would find a folded piece of paper under his cup. Not napkins anymore, but real parchment, thick, textured, deliberate. Inside would be a line or two, written in neat, careful handwriting. Some people don't play to perform. They play to survive, or the world doesn't need more noise. It needs someone who remembers how to listen. Jasmine never replied in words. She would just read, fold the note carefully, and slip it into the small wooden box she kept under the counter, the one that used to hold her concert programs. Leonard noticed her growing collection one morning and smirked. "Fan mail?"
"Something like that," she murmured, though the warmth in her cheeks gave her away. "Be careful," he teased, winking.
Men who write pretty words usually mean trouble, but Jasmine only smiled faintly. "He doesn't talk much."
"I don't think he means anything at all." Still, every time she unfolded one of those notes, her heart tightened. Not from fear, but from recognition.
His words weren't polished like poetry. They were raw, reflective, written by someone who understood what it meant to be broken and still try. One night, after Leonard had locked up and gone home, Jasmine stayed behind. The cafe was bathed in the golden light of a single lamp. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, a familiar rhythm now. She wiped down the last table, then drifted toward the piano, the one that had sat silent for years. Her fingers brushed the keys. They were cool beneath her touch, waiting. The memory of Adam's words floated back to her. "You play like you're remembering how to breathe." And maybe he was right. Maybe breathing wasn't about forgetting the pain, but learning to live with it. She sat down. The bench creaked softly under her weight. For a long while she didn't move, just sat there, listening to the sound of rain and her own heartbeat. Then, almost without realizing it, she pressed a key, a single note, fragile, tentative, then another, and another. A melody began to form, slow, hesitant, uncertain, yet alive. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't anyone's music, but hers. It came from somewhere deep, from the place she'd buried years ago beside Ava's memory. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. Each note was like a confession, each chord a breath she hadn't taken in years. Outside, under the awning across the street, Adam stood motionless. He hadn't meant to come. Not that late, not in the rain. But something had drawn him back, a quiet instinct he couldn't explain. Through the misted glass, he saw her, hair falling loose around her face, head bent over the piano, fingers moving as though speaking to ghosts. He didn't move, didn't dare. The sound reached him even through the rain, not loud, but piercingly real. It wasn't perfect. A few notes wavered, others clashed softly, yet somehow it was more beautiful than anything he'd ever heard. He realized, standing there with the rain dripping from his hair, that this was what he'd been searching for all along. Not brilliance, not perfection, but truth. Inside, Jasmine's eyes filled with tears as she finished the final phrase. The melody faded into silence, hanging in the air like breath after a sob. She sat there for a moment, her hands still on the keys, chest rising and falling as if she'd run miles. Then, slowly, she smiled. Small, fragile, but real. For the first time since Ava's death, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. She closed the lid gently, stood, and turned off the lights. Outside, she didn't see the man across the street watching her with a look that was part awe, part sorrow, and something that might have been hope. Adam stayed until the cafe went dark, the last echo of her music fading into the rain. When he finally walked away, he carried that melody with him, a sound he couldn't name, but one that would not leave him again. The following night, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean beneath a pale silver moon. The streets outside Vivace Café shimmered faintly, puddles catching the glow of streetlights like scattered fragments of glass. Inside, the world was still. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and only the faint smell of roasted beans lingered in the air. Jasmine stayed behind again. She didn't plan to. She never did. But something kept her there. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was the memory of what she'd felt the night before, that fleeting sense of peace she thought she'd lost forever. She lit the small lamp near the piano and sat down, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. Her hands hovered over the keys for a long time before she began to play. This time, the melody came easier. It wasn't perfect, albeit faltered, hesitated, but it was honest. The music drifted through the empty cafe, weaving between tables and chairs, filling the silence like a soft confession. It was a song without a name, born from everything she'd never said aloud. Each note carried fragments of memory, Ava's laughter echoing through summer afternoons, the quiet of hospital rooms, the stillness of her apartment when grief became too heavy to move. But there was something else too, something new, a warmth that had started to grow the day Adam walked through the door. When the last chord faded, Jasmine let her fingers rest on the keys, her breath trembling slightly. She whispered to no one, "I almost forgot how it feels to be alive." Then she turned off the lamp, locked up, and walked home beneath the quiet night sky. What she didn't see was Adam, standing once again across the street, watching through the rain-streaked window. He hadn't meant to return. Not that late, not again. But when he'd found himself wandering without direction, his feet somehow led him back here. He didn't move closer, didn't interrupt. He simply stood there in the dark, listening. The music reached him faintly, a fragile thread connecting two lonely hearts through the quiet hum of the city. And as he listened, he did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled, not the polite kind that photographers captured, but something small, private, and real. When the music stopped, he lingered for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of manuscript paper, the kind musicians used for composition. He hesitated. Then, under the soft glow of the streetlight, he carefully drew 4 notes, the same opening notes she had just played. Beneath them he wrote nothing, no name, no message, no signature. He folded the paper neatly and slipped it through the crack of the cafe door before walking away into the night. The next morning, the bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Jasmine entered, rubbing her arms against the early chill. The sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the dust in the air into golden flecks. She began her routine, opening blinds, cleaning counters, setting out pastries, until she noticed something near the piano. A small piece of folded paper lay on the counter, right where she usually placed her apron. Her brows furrowed. She picked it up slowly, unfolding it with care. Inside, on crisp white staff lines, were 4 notes written in neat, deliberate handwriting, identical to the ones she had played last night. For a moment, her breath caught. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. She knew. Adam. The realization made her heart flutter. Not with fear or confusion, but with something gentler, something unnamed. She glanced toward the window as if expecting him to be there, but the street outside was empty, only the morning sun and the faint sound of traffic. She stared at the notes again, her thumb brushing over the ink. There was no message, no explanation, just music, and somehow that said more than words ever could. That night, when the cafe closed, Jasmine sat down at the piano again. She placed the folded sheet beside her and began to play. She started with his 4 notes. Slow, tender, deliberate. Then she added 2 more, her own response. The melody expanded, filling the cafe like a heartbeat rediscovering its rhythm. The next morning, another sheet waited for her. This time, 6 notes, written in continuation of hers. She smiled. So it began. Each night she played. Each morning he replied. No letters, no explanations, just an unspoken dialogue written in ink and sound. Her melodies grew longer, braver, reaching places she hadn't dared to go since the night Ava died. Adam's written responses matched her tone perfectly, sometimes soft and wistful, sometimes sharp and restless, as though he understood every shift in her soul. The cafe became their bridge, the piano their language, Leonard noticed, of course. "You've been humming lately," he said one morning, eyeing her suspiciously. "Did I miss something good?" She just smiled. "Maybe you did," he grunted. Ah, so that's how it is, but he didn't ask further. He knew better than to interrupt something sacred. As days passed, the music between them grew into something more. It wasn't love yet. Not exactly. It was recognition. 2 people who had been silent for too long, finding a way to speak again through the only language they trusted. Sometimes she would pause mid-song, half expecting to feel him nearby, and though she never saw him, she always sensed his presence, like a faint melody beneath her own. It was strange, this quiet companionship, beautiful, fragile, and utterly theirs. Late one evening, after finishing her shift, Jasmine opened the latest folded sheet he'd left behind. There were no notes this time, just a single line written across the bottom. Every song needs silence between notes. That's where meaning lives. Her throat tightened as she read it again and again. Silence between notes.
That was them. She pressed the paper to her chest.
The faint smell of ink clinging to her fingers. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Outside, the wind carried the soft hum of the city, and somewhere in it, she could almost hear the music waiting for tomorrow. The cafe was unusually bright that morning. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floorboards, warming the air with that familiar scent of coffee and cinnamon. Jasmine was refilling the pastry display when Leonard's startled voice broke the morning calm. "Kid," he called from behind the counter, his reading glasses perched crookedly on his nose.
You might want to see this, she turned, wiping her hands on her apron.
"What is it?" He held up his phone. On the screen was a paused video thumbnail. A woman in a black uniform sitting at a grand piano, her head bowed, fingers poised above the keys. The caption read, "Mystery Waitress stuns billionaire Gala with Chopin performance." Jasmine's heart dropped. "Is that?" Leonard began, squinting closer. Before he could finish, she snatched the phone from his hand. The video started to play automatically. Her hands, her music, the silence that followed. And then her face, her stomach twisted. The sound of applause echoed through the tiny speaker, tinny and unreal. The comments flooded the screen. "Who is she? She plays like she's lived 1,000 lives. Someone find her. This woman deserves the world." She locked the phone with shaking fingers.
"Turn it off, Jasmine. Please, Leonard." He hesitated, then took the phone back, concern shadowing his eyes.
"How long do you think before they find out your name?" She exhaled shakily, pressing her palms against the counter to steady herself. "They already have. They always do." By noon, it was everywhere. Articles, reaction videos, hashtags. The Chopin waitress. The girl who played and vanished, paparazzi, appeared outside the cafe by afternoon. Their lenses pressed against the windows like hungry eyes, customers whispered as she served their drinks. Some tried to sneak photos. Others asked questions she didn't want to answer. "Are you really the girl from the video? What's your story? Will you play again?" She smiled tightly, murmuring polite excuses, but inside, panic clawed at her chest. The last time she had been in the spotlight, someone had died. When Adam arrived that day, she was gone. Leonard stood at the counter, arms crossed, worry etched deep into his face. "She bolted an hour ago. Couldn't take it." Adam glanced toward the window, the flashing cameras, the crowd pressing against the glass.
He clenched his jaw. "Do you know where she'd go?"
Leonard hesitated. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere nobody's watching." He handed Adam her old umbrella, the one she always forgot. "You'll need this." Jasmine ran until her lungs burned. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to disappear again. Her steps carried her across the bridge into the quieter parts of Brooklyn, where the world didn't care who she was. She ended up in an empty park. The rain had started again, light, misty, almost merciful. She sat on a bench beneath a dying oak, hugging her knees, trying to breathe. The phone in her pocket buzzed relentlessly. Messages from unknown numbers, calls from journalists, offers from agents. She threw it into the grass, trembling. Her reflection flickered faintly in a puddle near her feet. Eyes red, face pale, hair clinging to her cheeks. She whispered to herself,
"I told you. Ava, I told you I shouldn't have played. The guilt, the memories."
The noise, it all rushed back like a tide she couldn't hold. For years, she had built her silence like armor. Now it was cracking apart. She didn't hear the footsteps at first. Only when a shadow fell over her did she look up. Adam stood there, soaked again, as if rain had followed him. He didn't speak, just stood a few feet away, letting her decide whether he was welcome. When she said nothing, he sat down beside her, not close, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating through the cold air. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Don't say it." He didn't. They sat in silence, the sound of rain filling the space between them. After a long moment, he spoke, voice low and steady. "They'll keep talking for a while.
Then they'll find something new. They always do. I can't go through it again," she whispered.
The lights, the attention, the pretending."
"I can't be that girl." "You don't have to." She turned toward him, eyes wide, desperate.
"Then what do I do, Adam?"
"Hide forever?"
He looked at her. Really looked. Through the fear, through the hurt. "No, you face it. But this time, on your terms." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks.
"You don't understand."
"Music cost me everything." He paused, his expression softening. "Maybe, but silence is costing you more." The words hit her like a chord, struck too deep. For a while, neither spoke. The rain slowed, tapering into a mist that blurred the city lights. Jasmine finally picked up her phone from the ground, brushing off the dirt. Her screen lit up with messages.
Dozens of them.
Each notification a reminder of the world she tried to leave behind. "Do it for you," Adam said quietly. "Not for them." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the fear hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It no longer felt like a weight pressing her down, but like something she could carry, maybe even learn from. She exhaled, long and unsteady.
"I don't know if I'm ready." "Then don't be ready," he said softly.
"Just be brave." As they sat there, the sky cleared. The city stretched around them, loud, messy, alive. Jasmine looked up at the grey clouds breaking apart and felt, for the first time, that maybe her story wasn't over yet. Maybe, just maybe, it was about to begin again. Night had settled over the city like a dark velvet curtain, heavy with the promise of rain. The lights of Brooklyn glowed faintly against low clouds, turning the streets into mirrors of gold and grey. Jasmine sat by her window, knees drawn to her chest, watching the reflections ripple in puddles below. Her phone was on the table beside her, still buzzing every few minutes, interview requests, performance offers, strangers demanding answers. She had turned the sound off, but the glow of notifications kept flashing like tiny storms. She reached out, switched it face down, and whispered, "Enough." But silence wasn't peace anymore. It was noise of another kind, the echo of everything she'd lost and everything she was too afraid to reach for again. A soft knock broke the stillness. Her heart jumped. She hesitated, then crossed the small apartment and opened the door. Adam stood there, hair damp from the drizzle, his coat collar turned up against the wind. In his hand was a small paper bag from a nearby cafe. "You're supposed to be resting," she said, surprised. "I brought tea," he replied simply. "Chamomile. I remembered you said it helps you sleep." Her throat tightened.
"You shouldn't be here."
"The press will—" "They won't find me," he said gently, stepping inside as she moved aside. "I told them I had an emergency meeting." "Which is true in a way," she managed a faint smile.
"I didn't realize I qualified as an emergency." "You do?" he said softly. The air between them felt fragile, too heavy for words,
too tender for silence. He placed the bag on the counter and took in the small apartment. The piano against the wall, the shelf of old music books, the framed photo of two sisters smiling in the sun. His gaze lingered on it. "Your sister?" he asked quietly. Jasmine nodded, her voice a whisper.
"Ava, she was 14. He didn't ask what happened."
Somehow, he already knew. She poured tea into 2 chipped mugs, the faint aroma filling the space. They sat across from each other at the small table, steam curling between them. For a while, neither spoke. The city outside hummed, the kind of distant, steady noise that made small apartments feel less lonely. Then Adam said, "You know, when my company went public,
Everyone said I was the happiest man in New York. Cameras, headlines, speeches. They called me the man who built an empire out of silence." He smiled bitterly.
they didn't know that the silence wasn't peace, it was exhaustion. I'd spent so long being what they expected, the visionary, the perfectionist, the man with all the answers, that I forgot what I sounded like when I wasn't pretending. Jasmine looked at him, eyes wide and soft. "So you stopped talking?" He nodded. Stopped talking. Stopped feeling. Until one night, someone played Chopin and reminded me what breathing sounded like. Her lips parted. "You mean, yes," he said simply. "You." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She turned her face away, blinking hard. "Don't say that. You don't know what that night cost me." "I do," he said. "It showed me how much pain can live inside beauty." She shook her head, the words tumbling out, fragile and shaking.
Everyone wants something from me now.
"They don't care why I played."
They just want the story.
The tragedy. The girl who lost her sister and found her music again. It's all entertainment to them. I'm not them, Adam said quietly.
I don't care about the story. I care about you. She met his gaze, tears spilling freely now. Why? Why me? Because you're the first person I've met who doesn't hide behind noise. He leaned forward slightly.
You don't need to play for them or for me, but don't stop because you're afraid. Do it for you. The words hit her like a soft blow, not painful, but deep. Do it for you. Simple. True. Terrifying. She pressed her trembling hands together, trying to steady her breath.
I don't know how anymore, Adam's expression gentled.
Then start with one note. For a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping against the window pane. Jasmine lowered her eyes, her voice breaking. Ava used to tell me that too. Before every concert, she'd whisper, "One note at a time, Jazz." She let out a shaky laugh. I thought if I stopped playing, the world would stop hurting.
But it didn't. It just got quieter. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Tentative, grounding.
Maybe it's time to make a little noise again. The contact was light, but it sent a warmth through her chest that startled her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she whispered, "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," he said, smiling faintly, "but it's worth it." Later, after he left, Jasmine stood by the piano, the faint scent of chamomile still lingering in the air. The city outside glimmered through the rain, restless, imperfect, alive. She sat down, her hands hovering above the keys. She didn't play, not yet. Instead, she took out her phone, opened the voice recorder, and pressed record. Her fingers trembled as she struck the first note.
Then another.
Then another, no melody,
No pattern.
just sound, just breath. The music was messy, uneven, almost childlike, but it was hers. When she stopped, she let the final note fade, her chest rising and falling like she'd been running. She whispered into the microphone, "Thank you." Then she sent the recording to Adam.
No text, no explanation. Across the city.
Adam sat in his apartment, the lights dim, the rain tracing slow paths down the glass. His phone buzzed. He opened the message, pressed play, and listened. The sound filled the room, fragile, raw, alive. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't perfect. It was Jasmine. And as he listened, he closed his eyes and whispered, almost to himself, "When the world stops listening, I'll hear you still." 6 months later, spring returned to New York. The air was softer, touched with the scent of lilacs and rain. The city, ever restless,
Had moved on. New headlines, new sensations.
new names to adore and forget. But inside Jasmine Hart's world, the noise had quieted into something gentler. She still worked part-time at Vivace Cafe, though Leonard teased that she was semi-retired. She smiled more now, not often, but enough that customers noticed. Sometimes, when the morning rush slowed, she'd hum softly as she wiped the tables. The piano no longer sat silent. Every night before closing, she played a few notes, just enough to remind herself that the music hadn't left her. And every Sunday morning, there was still that same table by the window, the one where Adam sat, only now he didn't come for silence. He came to listen. One evening, he handed her an envelope. Plain white, no name, just the faint trace of his handwriting. "What's this?" she asked, drying her hands on her apron. "An invitation," he said, simply. She opened it. Inside was a single card. The renewal concert, a night for those who've lost and found their voices again, featuring Jasmine Hart. Her eyes widened.
"Adam," he smiled, calm but hopeful. "It's not a gala."
No cameras, just people who understand. Veterans, survivors, kids from music programs, the kind of audience that listens with their hearts. She looked down at the card, fingers trembling.
"You want me to play?"
"I want you to share what you've already found," he said softly. "Your music, Chopin's, not anyone else's, yours." She hesitated. Fear flickered, old and familiar. But behind it was something else. Warmth. Trust. She nodded slowly. "Then I'll play our song." The concert was held in a small hall in Brooklyn, once an old theater, now restored with mismatched chairs and soft yellow lights. There were no tuxedos, no champagne, no glittering chandeliers. Just quiet anticipation and the faint scent of roses on the stage. As Jasmine stepped out, the murmur of the crowd hushed. She wore a simple ivory dress, her hair tied back loosely. The piano stood under a single spotlight. She sat down, took a deep breath, and looked into the audience. She spotted Leonard near the back, grinning proudly, and beside him Adam, no suit this time, just a dark shirt and that steady, grounding presence. Their eyes met, and he nodded once. It was enough. Jasmine turned back to the piano and began to play. The first notes rose like a whisper. Fragile, hesitant, then gradually they gathered strength. The melody wasn't Chopin, nor any classical piece the world would recognize. It was something entirely her own, the in-between song. It was a song of pauses and beginnings, of sorrow and survival, a dialogue between silence and sound, between the person she once was and the woman she was becoming. The audience leaned forward, caught in the spell of it, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. She played the middle section softly, the notes trembling like memories. Then, as she reached the bridge, her fingers steadied, her body swayed with the rhythm, and her face lifted toward the light. For the first time, she didn't play for anyone else. She played for herself. Each note was a heartbeat, a confession, a promise, and when the final chord came, low, resonant, and tender, the hall fell into perfect silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand applause. It simply was. Then one by one people stood. The applause began softly, then grew, a wave of warmth that seemed to fill the entire room. Jasmine bowed her head, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She had cried before, but this time the tears didn't hurt. They healed. After the concert, she found Adam waiting backstage. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed her a small folded note. She opened it with shaking fingers. "You didn't play to be brave. You played because you already were." Her throat closed.
"Adam," he smiled, quite proud.
"Welcome back." She stepped forward and hugged him. For a long moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The music had already said it all. Outside the night was cool, the city glowing softly in the distance. Jasmine and Adam walked together beneath the streetlights, their shadows long and intertwined on the pavement. She glanced at him and said with a smile, "Do you think the world will let us stay this quiet?" He chuckled. "Then we'll make our own kind of noise." And somewhere behind them, from the open doors of the concert hall, the in-between song began to play again, a recording echoing through the night, carrying with it the sound of two people who had finally learned how to breathe together. A year later, spring had returned once more, this time softer, greener, carrying the scent of promise in every gust of wind. The building that once housed an abandoned dance studio now bore a new sign above its door, Ava's Room, a community for music and healing. The letters were simple, hand-painted in warm gold. On opening day, the small courtyard was filled with laughter, children chasing each other, parents talking quietly, the faint hum of a piano drifting through open windows. Jasmine stood in the doorway, her heart full and trembling. She could hardly believe this place was real. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across rows of small pianos, violins, and music stands. The walls were decorated with drawings made by the kids, bright colors, crooked notes, messy rainbows. At the front of the room, a group of children sat at the piano bench, waiting for their teacher. "Miss Jasmine, can we play the happy song again?" one of them asked. A little girl with curls and freckles that reminded her of Ava. Jasmine smiled. "Of course. But remember, play it like you mean it, not like you're trying to be perfect." The girl nodded solemnly. "Like you always say, mistakes are just part of the music." "Exactly," Jasmine said softly. She sat beside them, guiding their small hands across the keys. The melody that emerged was simple and imperfect, notes slightly off, rhythm uneven. Yet it was beautiful. It was alive. From the back of the room, Adam leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. He wore no suit today, just rolled-up sleeves and that familiar calm expression that had once unnerved her, now only comforted. "Looks like the maestro's doing well," he said when the class ended. She turned to him, grinning. "You say that like you're not part of this." "I'm the man who fixes leaky roofs and writes donation letters," he said. "You're the heart of it." "Not true," she replied, wiping her hands.
"We built this together." He smiled, that quiet, knowing smile that always made her chest tighten.
"Maybe, but you gave it a name." Her gaze softened. "Ava would have loved this place." "I think she does," he said simply. For a moment, they stood there, surrounded by the faint echoes of children's laughter and half-finished songs. That evening, after the last student left and the sun dipped low over the city, the two of them sat at the grand piano near the window. Outside, the street was lined with tulips and glowing lampposts. Inside, the air smelled of dust and dreams. Jasmine ran her fingers lightly over the keys.
"It's strange," she murmured.
"For years, I thought music had taken everything from me. But maybe it was just waiting to give it back differently." Adam looked at her. "How differently?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "Like this." She began to play, the same melody they had written together months ago, the in-between song. But now it had grown, fuller, warmer, touched with sunlight instead of sorrow. Adam reached out, his hand resting on the keys beside hers. Together they played, their fingers moving in harmony, the notes flowing like conversation, like memory, like love rediscovered. The sound filled the room, reaching out through the open window and spilling into the twilight. People walking by slowed to listen. Some smiled, others just paused, caught by the serenity of it. When the last note faded, Jasmine leaned her head gently against Adam's shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think silence was my safety.
Now I think it's just
the space between the music." He nodded, pressing a soft kiss to her hair.
"That's where we found each other, between the notes." She smiled through her tears.
"And that's where we'll stay." As the city settled into night, the light from Ava's room glowed softly against the dark. Inside, two figures sat at the piano, the faint strains of their song lingering in the air. It wasn't a song of loss anymore, it was a song of home.